If someone comes in with knee pain, I'm treating their suboccipitals, I'm treating their hamstring, their calf, their glutes, this, and I'm like, whoa, that's exhausting. You know, you need to work smarter, not harder. Okay, so being holistic is looking at the body as a whole, but being able to prescribe the right exercise at the right time, give the right stimulus at the right time. Hey, welcome to the Go-To Physio podcast. My name is Dave O'Sullivan, and in this podcast, my aim is to give you 15 years of my experience in professional sport and private practice, and share that knowledge so that you can get real world results with your complex patients who have failed traditional approaches. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, welcome to this episode of the Go-To Physio podcast. We're on episode 37 today. So this is season 3, the third episode of the third season. And the new format for the podcast is there's 4 types of shows that you're going to see on this podcast this year. Okay, so you got your happy progressing patients episodes. So that might look like HPP. Okay, that's all around the book. Okay, so that's where I'm going to look at a chapter in the book, and I'm going to help you going from knowing the content or knowing what's covered in the chapter to really understanding it. Okay, one of my coaches that I worked with in the past, he said something that I really liked. It was like, you hear information, you know it, and then eventually you understand it. Okay, and I want to help you go from knowing it to understanding it, because I think a lot of people with knowledge, we're stuck at knowing, but we don't really understand it. Okay, and again, I always say we want to understand the why behind everything we do. Okay, that's the first type of episode. Second type of episode is a Q&A. Okay, so that's where you'll post in your questions, and I'll answer 3 questions at a time. To answer, get your question answered, head over to thegotophysio.com/questions. You'll see a form. Just type in your questions there. No funny business. Okay, and I'll get them answered for you. Okay. Third type of episode, it's just a traditional, it'll be me interviewing somebody. Okay, so we'll have some of those at some point in the season. My promise to you with those interviews is that it'll be very practical. Okay, so you'll be able to apply that knowledge in the real world. Okay, and then the fourth one is just a topical thing where I just think, okay, you know what, I think this is really important at this moment in time. It's probably not related to the book, although I'm sure there'll be a principle or 2 from the book in there, but it'll just be something that I think is really important that's come up either in my mentorship group or something else, and I think actually I need to cover this. Okay, there are the 4 types of things. There's no advertising or any of that crap where we're going to, spam you or anything like that in these podcast episodes. The only thing that I ask in return, if you enjoy the show, if you get value from the show, just share it. Okay, so again, send it to a colleague, share it on your social media. Just let people know that you're listening to it, or better still, leave a review. Okay, if you don't like it or you didn't get value from it, no dramas. Okay, so today's episode, it's a HPP episode. Okay, so that's where we're going to go back into the book. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at humbling lessons from ProSport. Okay, now again, I'm going to go in a lot more detail than I cover in the book, and I'm actually going to give you some of my biggest lessons really in ProSport. Okay, so the first thing I talk about on page 31 in the book is this concept of not knowing what a syndesmosis injury was. Okay, where I went in on first day with Leeds Carnegie, and the head physio was like, yeah, he's got a syndesmosis injury. Not a clue what a syndesmosis was. It was Lee Blackett actually, who was the Wasps head coach, and who was with Leeds at the time. And I remember, I went to my natural defensive, which was strong hands-on. So I've done a lot of hands-on around his peroneals and his tibant, made him wince a bit, and was lucky enough just to pacify him a little bit until I could get home that night and figure out what it was. Okay, now the biggest thing there with Leeds at that time was really where I was like a deer in headlights. Okay, where I was guessing, I was second guessing myself a lot. Okay, and I continued to do that probably for a year and a half at Leeds, where I was letting players progress. And if I was being completely honest with myself, I didn't know if they were ready to guess. Okay, so I was taking silly risks with players, and some of it did come back to bite me in the arse a little bit, where a hammy might recur, an injury might recur, or something like that. Now, fast forward 15 years later, okay, I like to think, okay, and I don't get it right all of the time, far from it, okay, but I make less and less mistakes because of the structure and system that we have in place, okay, and that allows me to take the emotion out of the decision making and actually justify, okay, the patient has earned the right to progress, okay, and there's a lot of principles that I cover in the book that goes through that, okay, but ultimately you're going to see at each stage of the graded exposure program where a patient, they'll usually be rigid, their autonomic nervous system will be engaged, they'll be a little bit stiff, there'll be a little bit of a threat response. You'll be able to see that usually with the person in front of you. And then as they go to, like as Louis Gifford said, thoughtless, fearless movement, where they're relaxed, they're springy, that's usually the time for me. It's like, okay, they're ready to progress. Now, obviously, you've healing times and all of that as well, okay? But that was the biggest learning curve for me at the start was like, whoa, I'm taking a lot of risks here. Some of them paid off, some of them I got caught out, okay? And I think there's a lot of therapists still, to this day, they're taking silly risks with patients where they're just letting them progress, they're letting them go back running or whatever it is, the high-level activities, without actually the patient having earned the right to do so. Okay, and I think we see a lot of flare-ups, a lot of problems and pain coming back again. Okay, now ironically, a lot of therapists, a lot of these issues that actually starts in the subjective objective assessment, because we need to make sense of the symptoms and we need to answer the 4 big ProSport questions in private practice. Okay, player gets injured, head coach wants to know what's the problem, why did it happen, what's the plan, and how long is it going to take to get it back? You being forced to answer those 4 questions, or me being forced to answer those 4 questions repetitively, was probably the best thing that ever happened, okay? And especially when I went into England Rugby Union, it went up a notch again, okay? Where Eddie Jones, he wanted to know everything, or certainly he wanted it all on paper, okay? Where we had to have the treatment plan from start to finish with the athlete. And you know what? It was good because it held me accountable and it made me think. Okay, in episode 1 of this season, which is episode 35, we talked a lot about critical thinking and the lost art of critical thinking. Okay, so the structure of the system, being able to answer those 4 questions, that's how you're going to overcome a lot of this taking silly risks. Okay, now the next thing that I talked about in the second kind of humbling lesson, okay, that I was starting to realize with Leeds Rhinos, and I definitely realized with Munster Rugby, was getting rid of pain is easy, but keeping the pain away is the true art. Okay. And I went to Munster and I thought, I was very, very strong with my hands-on treatment. And I had this bit of a reputation at that point, where my hands-on was very, very strong. And I'll be honest, I was going home at night, my hands were aching. Okay. I was sore, but I was putting up with it because I was like, this is me. This is my identity. I'm a very hands-on physio. I'm proud of it. Blah, blah, blah. I'm getting results and all this. But what I quickly realized there was actually the hands-on treatment is only going to get you so far. Okay. And I realized, and I saw this pattern where the first couple of sessions, and I saw this pattern in private practice as well when I came back from Munster a lot, is the first couple of sessions, the hands-on works really well. But then once that novel stimulus isn't so novel again, then usually session 3 or 4, there was like this patient progress plateau. And I was noticing that more and more, where the same hands-on techniques that I was using at the start in the first few sessions, they weren't as dramatic as results or changes, processing changes, whatever we want to call them. That happens usually sessions 3 or 4 in. Okay. And that's when then I started to see this stuff. Again, I knew it, but I didn't really understand it. And I was like, okay, well, what's going on here? And that's where then it really opened my eyes that actually I probably have holes and gaps in my knowledge, and I actually need to fill those gaps. And that's where the rehab, then I started to take a better appreciation of that. Now, I'll always talk about the 2 guys at Munster that had to retire on my watch. Again, one of them was just a case where pathology was just crazy, and there literally was pain equals damage on this point, or certainly contributing a lot towards it. And then there was another one where, there wasn't a whole host of damage, to see, but psychologically there was stuff there. Confidence was broken down. The thoughtless, fearless movement, the self-belief, the self-esteem with the player wasn't there. And that's really where I realized that actually I needed a more holistic, I needed a more robust approach. Now, when I say holistic, I don't mean treat every single tissue in the body. Okay. And I think there's a lot of therapists these days who are proud of being holistic. And I get on calls with therapists and they say, yeah, I'm very holistic. If someone comes in with knee pain, I'm treating their suboccipitals, I'm treating their hamstring, their calf, their glutes, this. And I'm like, whoa, that's exhausting. You need to work smarter, not harder. Okay. So being holistic is looking at the body as a whole, but being able to prescribe the right exercise at the right time, give the right stimulus at the right time, probably a better way of saying it, okay? By working smarter, not harder, by thinking twice, treating once. Okay. So that was really at Munster at that time when I realized, actually, you know what, some patients aren't going to respond well to this hands-on treatment after a few sessions. I need more. Okay. And then when I left Munster and went back to England, to Huddersfield, that's where then I realized there was no magic bullet. Okay. Where again, I've told this story a few times. I went down to London with a player, a big hip issue. I'd spent tens of thousands of pounds on his course. And I kept getting saying, this is the advanced levels. This is the advanced levels where you learn all this stuff. And I was like, I don't have time. I'm in ProSport. So I brought the athlete down to the guru. And, you know, we got quick changes. We got these nervous system processing changes where there was an increased range of motion. There was a decreased pain experience. You know, and I said, okay, well, what does he need to do now when we get back? He was like, no, that's it. He's sorted. I was like, it can't be that easy. Okay. And, you know, by the time we got to the train station in King's Cross, the pain was back in his hip again. And that was just the point where it's just like, I give up searching for this magic bullet. And I think that's the beauty of ProSport is it's pretty humbling, where you can see that actually there's nowhere to hide. Okay. Because the athlete, the low tolerance that they go through, you know, they're stressing their bodies constantly. They're under a lot of psychological stress as well. Okay. There's expectations to perform, many other things, contracts, all of that stuff. But also you're with them throughout the day. So again, if the pain comes back again, they're going to tell you, and they're not going to mince their words. They're not going to be polite to you and then, you know, not show up for the next physio session. They're going to tell you if things aren't working. And that's really where then I realized that actually, you know what, I don't need to go on this continued search for magic bullet. I actually just need a graded exposure. And that's around that time I was reading the Louis Gifford Aches and Pains books. And I started to go all in, and I committed to building out my structured step-by-step system. Okay, so that was probably the biggest lesson of all, was around that Munster time. It was pivotal. Then going to London with that player, that was probably the defining point for me, really. Okay, now they're the biggest lessons that I talk about in the book at this point. And I actually break it down into a framework for you. So again, the key thing that I want you to get from these podcast episodes is that you can actually apply this stuff in the real world. Okay. I don't want you just to listen to me and then that's it. Okay. I want you to be able to notice and feel a change in your clinical practice for giving me, in return for giving me your time and your energy. Okay. So on page 37 of Happy Progressing Patients, I'll look at the 8 pillars. Okay. So you got your subjective, your objective, your communication with your patient, your treatment plan design, your rehab planning, your hands-on treatment, your low-level rehab, your high-level rehab or bridge the gap, and then your S&C, okay, your strength and conditioning, okay? Now, I probably would reword strength and conditioning a little bit now, which I'll talk about in a different episode, okay? But what I want you to do is I want you to go back and I want you to look at those 8 pillars, okay? And then I want you to evaluate yourself on a score of 0 to 10. How strong is my subjective? How strong is my objective? How strong is my effective explanation, my treatment plan design, my hands-on, my low-level rehab, my high-level rehab, my S&C? So around those times with Munster and Leeds, you know, my subjective objective would have been all right, probably a 5s. Communication, I didn't put a lot of emphasis. I would have given myself probably a 3. Rehab planning was probably a 5. My hands-on treatment, I would have scored myself as 110 out of 100 or 11 out of 10 at that time, okay? My low-level rehab was poor, okay? Knowing now what I know then. I think I said that right. So that would have been a 3 out of 10. My high-level rehab, bridging the gap from low to high-level rehab, that would have been a 3 or 4 out of 10, knowing now what I thought I knew then. And then my S&C, my strength work, I would have given myself a 9 or a 10. I would have thought I was strong in the gym with athletes, okay? So you kind of have this hands-on dominant therapist. That was me at Leeds, okay? Then you've kind of got your strength dominant therapist who just gives everyone strengthening exercises. The problem with strength exercises is there's a lot of stuff that's happening at sub-maximal levels, okay? And again, if you look at like the force steadiness literature, the torque steadiness stuff, I don't think strength training actually addresses some of that stuff. And I'll talk about that in a separate episode, because there's a lot of athletes that I work with who are very, very strong. They still have pain and they still have issues, okay? And that's where very often we need to look at it through a different lens. Okay, I think there's definitely a place for strengthening, and I do agree that, you know, you feel better with strengthening, but I think there's a few things that have to happen before that. And again, I'll talk about that in a separate episode. Okay, so the key thing that we want really is we want all these 8 pillars to be 9 out of 10s. So if you look at like where you spend your CPD money at the moment, okay, like, or where you're spending your time, energy, like, are you just looking for a new rehab exercise or a hands-on technique? Or are you actually focused on building your system and your structure? Okay, because it's the structure and the system that gives you the clarity and gives you the confidence. And that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that I say to therapists is, you know, when therapists come on board the mentorship with me, I'm not looking for you to be a clone of me. I don't want you to, treat exactly like me, because you've got different experiences. You work in different environments to me. You've attended different courses and all of that. What I want you to do is build your structural step-by-step system where you can see where all your previous courses fit into these 8 pillars. Okay, and I think it's a nice framework where you can see where your weak links are. Now, a little bit of a tip, okay, is probably the most important pillar of all is the subjective assessment. Okay, because that's where you're going to make sense of the story. That's where the strategy is usually. Okay, and again, strategy is 80% of the success with complex patients. We have to get the strategy right, and then the tactics is usually the 20%. Okay, but the strategy is found in the subjective assessment. That's where we make sense of the patient's symptoms. We ask higher level questions to get higher level information, so that we can make sense of the symptoms. We understand exactly where I want to get back to, what would progress look like. And then we actually design our treatment plan and our communication of the treatment plan. It's all based on the information we get in the subjective. Similar, when we go into the objective assessment, when you see stuff in the objective assessment, the high quality questions in the subjective allows you to make sense of the stuff that you're seeing in the objective. So if you brush over the subjective, your objective, then it can be overwhelming. You can miss stuff. You can just feel like, oh, I'm not connecting the dots. So that's where I would say the subjective assessment is actually the most important one to nail there. Okay. I think there's like that analogy of, if I had an hour to chop down a tree, I'd spend, 59 minutes sharpening the axe, or whatever the analogy is there. Okay. I think that holds true with the subjective assessment as well. Okay. If I had only, an hour to treat a complex patient, I'd probably spend 50 minutes on the subjective assessment. And then I would probably, spend 10 minutes on the objective assessment and the treatment. If I had to, if I could only do one thing to influence the patient and give the patient one stimulus. Okay. I think you get my point there. Okay. So that's the big things, key takeaways from today's episode. Just be aware that very often, as that kind of novel stimulus from hands-on treatment isn't so novel anymore, that usually that patient progress slump happens around 3 to 4 sessions in, from my experience. And that's where we need to keep the patient progressing. We need to keep them excited. I talked about this in the last episode where we hit milestones with the patient. We need to understand that the patient's motivation level drops as the sessions go on. Okay, so again, I'm a big believer, and I teach Fogg's behavior model in my mentorship. Okay. Behavior equals motivation, ability, and trigger. Okay. So again, the trigger becomes important at that point, and I'll do a whole different episode on that. Okay. We need to understand that getting rid of pain and changing range of motion and changing pain is easy. That's the easy part. Okay. Because we're dealing with a nervous system. The hard part is keeping the pain away when the patient leaves the treatment room and they go out into the real world. And that's where really there's no hands-on technique or anything like that that's going to outdo or be superior to a graded exposure program, okay? Where we give the right stimulus at the right time. We show the nervous system it's safe. And we, again, remember that the thoughtless, fearless movement that Louis Gifford alluded to, the confidence, the self-esteem, the belief in the body, the patient has to do the work. We have to expose them to those situations so that they can get that self-belief back. They can update the belief system. That's it for this week. Once again, if you've got questions, okay, you want to get your questions answered in those special episodes, go to physio.com/questions. You'll see the form there. For our project that isn't announced yet, okay, but if you're listening to this, then it is for people who aren't quite ready for the mentorship. Go to physio.com/members. Okay, you'll see that. If you want a copy of the book, if you haven't got it already, go to physio.com/book. And if you want to know more about the mentorship, which is the flagship product, which is the most simple and direct path to building a structured step-by-step system to give you confidence to treat your complex patients, then head over to gotophysio.com/mentorship. All right. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. All right. Let's have a great week ahead. Let's solve big problems for patients. Let's give more in value than we take in payment. Okay, let's think twice, treat once. Okay, I'm running out of analogies here. All right, so have a great week ahead. Let's make a big impact on people's lives. I'll see you in the next episode.